Welcome back to the Practically Pastoring Podcast. My name is Frank, and I'm glad that you're here. We are with all my friends from across 2 other states outside of Florida. I'm here in Safety Harbor, Florida. Over in Baltimore, Maryland, we got Jeffrey Simpson.
Hello.
Down in Sumter, South Carolina, we got Delmar Pete.
Good to be back, but now I'm up from where you are, Frank.
That's
I'm
right.
not over either. I'm up.
You're right. I got to change all my verbiage. And then with me in the Morning After Ministry studios, we have Andrew Larson.
Greetings and salutations, one and all.
And Timothy Miller.
Hello, world.
Hey, guys. So we are here, all 5 of us. We have a lot of exciting things happening, a lot of great conversation to have in this episode. But before we do that, we have a sponsor, not only of this podcast, but we also have a sponsor of the conference. Andrew, can you talk about our sponsor, In Church Merch?
Boy, can I. We're talking about church merch, guys. Go to howcanipray.com and you can discover church merch. Church merch is exactly what it sounds like. It is merchandise for your church. If you need t-shirts for an event.
What if I need a new mug?
If you need a mug for a first-time visitors giveaway or something like that.
What if someone's like, I want a hat with my church logo on it?
Go to church merch, Tim.
What?
Here's the thing. You're not going to need to come in with a graphic already. They've got graphic designers ready to go.
Okay.
And they'll throw that in for free. If you let them put the church merch logo on your stuff, you get 10% discount. Plus, you get a discount every time you reorder in the future. So you know how sometimes you do that thing where you have the setup fee and all that stuff when you're ordering t-shirts or whatever?
Sure.
You don't have to do that ever again. And in fact, you get a discount the next time you order the same thing.
What if I'm in need of maybe a unique fundraiser? You think they could do something like that for us?
I'm sure they could. They've got group fundraising opportunities.
That's incredible.
They've got quotes that you're going to get the same day, so you won't be waiting for a week to figure out how much money you're going to spend. Just do yourself a favor. Go to howcanipray.com.
So move over Vistaprint Hello Church Merch.
Yeah, it's Vistaprint Plus.
That's it. It's Vistaprint Plus.
That's not what it is.
No. It's church merch.
Church merch. It is church merch by church leaders for church leaders. It's kind of like FUBU. Move over FUBU, but for
Yes.
church leaders.
Yes. Gold. There you go.
Chubu?
You heard it here. Church merch.
That doesn't make sense.
And Church Merch is a proud sponsor of the Practically Pastoring Conference. We are super excited. Andrew, you have something else to say?
They were a proud sponsor until I just did that ad read, and now they're thinking about it.
They're looking for new sponsors.
Reluctant sponsor, church merch.
So the Practically Pastoring Conference is happening February 17th to the 19th in, I almost said Safety Harbor, Florida, at Lakeview Church. In Tarpon Springs, Florida, just about 25 minutes north of here. And we want you there. We have a special promotion going on right now. It's Cyber Monday. Tomorrow's Giving Tuesday. And we want you here Wednesday. It's the day after. So you just have to go to practicallypastoringconference.com and use promo code Turkey20, and you'll save $20 of the price of the conference. If you want to laugh a little bit, if you go to our Practically Pastoring Instagram, Jeff was in town, so the 4 of us got together and we made some silly videos promoting.
I didn't think they were silly. I thought they were pretty epic.
They were very masculine too.
Hey, how many takes did it take on the Frisbee thing? Several people have asked.
I commented. That was my second try.
Really?
Yeah.
He's not lying. Jeff actually nailed that pretty quickly. So
Jeff's a real deal.
Yeah.
Or lucky.
So, or lucky. Yeah. Andrew tried like 7 times and he missed. Terrible.
I nailed it when we weren't rolling, and then when we started recording, I missed 7 times. The first time when I was just like goofing off, I hit it. It was like, oh man, do that again, and then I couldn't.
The footage is yet to be released, but almost nailed one from the UVT.
It's true.
Or UTV, whatever it's called.
Same thing. It's like a UTI.
Cranberry.
Prefer not.
Cranberry juice.
But man, that would have been pretty epic. We were cooking on that thing too, and I second try almost got it.
So close.
Well.
PracticallyPastoringConference.com. We hope to see you there. Okay, so here's the first question. This is in another Facebook group called the Pastors for Pastors group. And as I like to do, I like to find anonymous questions, but sometimes the questions are anonymous. But here's a question from someone. First time asking a question on here. I've been preaching at my home church for 2 years now, in the rotation with both my pastor and another pastor. I'd say I get to preach at the pulpit every 6 to 8 weeks. I am new, clearly, and this isn't a secret question. My desire to preach more my church. My question is it out of line to look for and preach at other churches? A combination of sharing the word as the Holy Spirit lays it on me and for practice delivering a spirit-filled message effectively. This person wants to preach more. They preach about 6 to 8 times a year at their church. They're asking if it's out of line for them to preach outside of their church and other opportunities like that. What would you guys say to this guy?
No.
As in, no, don't do it.
No, as in no, I don't think it's out of line.
Okay.
However, I would say a desire to preach is not the most important qualification that a preacher needs. I would hope that there would be a relationship with other churches. Listen, if you're preaching 6 or 8 times a year, you've got, if not video, at least audio recordings that you can share. I don't know if you're on staff at your church, if that's a different conversation. If you are a lay leader in your church who's preaching 6 times a year, by all means, go into any church that wants you, that's calling you. If you are on staff at a church and you're preaching 6 or 8 times a year, do you know how many associate pastors would kill to be given 6 to 8 preaching opportunities a year? If you have staff responsibilities on Sunday morning, tough. You should not be going other places to preach. But if you are not on paid staff at your church, absolutely, if other churches are calling you, but your desire to preach is not the most important factor in those decisions. I'd say the lead of the Holy Spirit, whatever your church is saying, if your church is saying, hey, no, we don't think this is a good idea for you to do that, you should probably respect the spiritual authorities that God has placed over you. But just in general, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I don't have any issue with it. I guess my question is are you on staff? I don't think it says it there. Either way, I'd probably go to my lead pastor and just kind of express what's going on in my heart and what I feel like I'm being called to do. Getting to preach 6 to 8 times a year is pretty sweet. I wouldn't be all that upset about that. But if you are,
sounds awesome.
Yeah. If you are in a network of churches, man, this could be a really cool opportunity for you because not every church has multiple communicators, and sometimes there's a great need, especially with maybe some smaller churches in the area where the pastor's going to need some time, every now and then to just be able to come to church as a family or take a vacation. And if this is a sweet spot that you could fill, maybe your lead pastor could actually help establish maybe a network or a group of pastors in the area. And you could be kind of on rotation there.
Yeah, I don't think you distance yourself from your home church.
No.
If anything, I think you let your home church give you credibility here.
Andrew, Frank just preached at your
Frank
church
was here for
back-to-back weeks
when I was out of the country. So.
And when we told our Lakeview people that, they were like, oh, that is awesome.
Yeah.
Like they thought that was the coolest thing that Frank was getting to preach already in the area at another church. So I'm open.
Yeah, I would say that have the conversation, but you also don't want to be that guy who's in some of our Facebook groups who's like, hey, here's my promotional card. You should hire me to preach at it just looks super needy. So I would encourage if that conversation goes well with your pastor, I would actually bring him in on it. Say, hey, how would you advise I go about doing this? Because he may already know people in the area. And if he's got a credit, if he's been there a while and he has some credibility, his voucher for you is going to be better than some weird self-promotion thing. That being said, I would have 1 or 2 sermons that have been recorded and that look really well. So that way, if the church does ask, you could say, here's an example of my preaching, because the last thing you want to do is for them to invite you to your church and your style is completely incompatible with their church. It's very helpful for both of you. So if they listen to you preach and they're like, yo, this guy's way in a different place than where our congregation is, that actually may hurt your efforts than help. And when you're refining yourself as a pastor, generally, as you guys know, your congregations kind of mimic the pastor who is over them. So if you're in a completely mismatched situation, that's fine. If you're an experienced pastor, you can kind of like roll with it. But if you're just getting started out, I would really try to do what I can to make sure when you're preaching in other churches, is churches that is going to be a mutual benefit. So that'd be what I'd offer on the front end.
One thing that came to my mind is, and this will seem like a weird rabbit trail, but it's not. When I worked at a warehouse many years ago, before I moved to Maryland, I got forklift certified. And one of the things they tell you in like the certification and like the safety training is there's going to come a point in your operating of this piece of heavy machinery where you think that you are better at it than you are, and that you actually can become kind of dangerous with it. And I think there could be a parallel to preaching for a person in this situation. If you've been preaching every 6 weeks for 2 years, that's about 17 or 18 sermons, a little less than that if it's more spread out. And so you really don't have enough sermons under your belt yet to really have an assessment of if you're actually like gifted enough at it to be doing it every week. Because that does take, there's just a different grind when you start being the one that preaches every Sunday. And so you might be in that spot. And so maybe a different kind of question to think about is, why am I not getting asked to preach more often at my church? Is it because, there's a senior pastor and, he's going to preach 45 times a year, whatever it is? Or is there something that they're looking for that maybe you're not quite there yet? And so that could be part of the conversation with the senior pastor. And I agree, depending on whether or not you're on staff or not, changes this conversation. So to answer the question, is it out of line? The answer I would give is it could be. It's not necessarily that it is out of line. And I don't think either side of this conversation can give a hard answer. Yes, it's totally out of line for you to do that. Maybe, but it's not also right to say that it's not out of line and you should do whatever you want. There may be a reason why they're only asking you to preach every 6 to 8 weeks. Maybe you have other responsibilities. Maybe it's a great way for you to learn delegation and leadership. Let's say you are on staff. I was in this situation where I was the worship pastor / youth pastor at a church, and I preached every 6 or so weeks. And it forced me on a Sunday morning to be better at planning and delegating the worship team, since I wasn't going to lead worship and preach at that church. Now, I'm at a smaller church now where I typically do help lead worship musically, and then I also preach most of the time. So I just think there's some good opportunity for introspection here, in terms of like, you're obviously aware that you're new, but I'm guessing if you're like I was, you're probably a little overconfident in your skill set. And it might be good for you to do this for 4 years, and maybe your pastor is thinking that way. So maybe start the conversation that way. Hey, is there more opportunities for me to teach in this church? Can I teach a Sunday school class? Can I teach a Wednesday night class? Can I lead a Bible study? And that will hone some of the same skills, because I just think there could be a temptation for you to be so interested in preaching behind the pulpit, because you use that language, that you lose sight of like serving the local church, and you would hate to see that. That'd be just kind of my other side of the same coin, I guess.
It seems like he's asking the question, can he preach on Sundays at other churches? Which is a question that you need to talk to your lead pastor about, because that means you will physically not be there on the Sundays that you'll be somewhere else. But one thing, like if I heard this question a lot when I was in youth ministry, and I started getting asked to speak at like summer camps and conferences. People would ask me, "Hey, how can I speak at conferences? How can I speak at summer camps?" And Justin Knowles, who's a great youth pastor out in California, he made a long post about this. But I remember talking to him, and we agreed with the same concept. If you want to get opportunities to speak, whether it's at your church, whether it's at conferences or camps or whatever, you got to be able to say yes to as many things as you can that may not be as glamorous. So what you just said is like speak at youth ministry. Like if you I would like people who want to be good communicators, if you can speak to students effectively, you can be a better communicator, because you have to reduce these concepts to a way that a teenager. Youth ministry is the worst audience a communicator can preach in front of, because you have way more people who don't want to be there, who don't want to listen to you preach, who, your vocabulary has to change. But if you can have an engaging message where you can preach God's word in a way that is understandable to a student, then you can absolutely preach to a congregation of adults that are educated or whatever the situation may be, because you have learned those skills of problem solving towards students. And I would even say go a step further. Preach to elementary kids. If you can teach Bible studies to children, it will only make you a better communicator behind the pulpit on Sunday morning. Beyond that, Christian schools always look for speakers for their chapels. Like Jeff said, like Sunday school classes or Bible studies, even though it's different between preaching and teaching, you're using a lot of the same skills.
A lot of overlap.
And there's a lot of overlap, and it will only help you in that. Like I would say, like before I ever was a part of a teaching team at the church I was at, I was preaching every Sunday in student ministry. And those years preaching in student ministry really refined my skills, so that when I don't know, maybe this guy is a youth pastor. If it's 6 to 8 weeks, that's a pretty good amount for a youth pastor, if that's a youth pastor. But one thing we always tell youth pastors, and what's the Sunday 20th, December 29th is the classic youth pastor Sunday.
Yeah.
I always tell youth pastors this: when you get the opportunity to preach on a Sunday morning, which is that Sunday before New Year's, after Christmas, that Sunday, those holiday Sundays, whatever, try to, when you leave, and this is going to sound like narcissistic, but forgive me, when you preach that Sunday, don't let people think, oh, that was a great youth pastor sermon, or that was a great sermon for a youth pastor. Make them see, wow, that was a great sermon, and he happens to be a youth pastor too. And those type of like moments are credits to your account, so that when you are given more opportunities to preach, they're not thinking, I'm taking a chance on this youth pastor, or I'm taking this chance on the missions pastor, or whatever the case may be. Like, this is a guy who's a communicator who's serving in these other roles, and when he's asked to preach in this opportunity, like we're trusting him. And like, that was my mentality whenever I got the Sunday morning pulpit as a youth pastor. I was like, I want to not, like Andrew talks about, like, you're not hitting home runs every sermon, you're trying to get on first base. If you're a youth pastor, you're trying to aim for the fences, because you want to be able to impress upon the people that you are not just a guy that wears gym shorts every Sunday and just eats pizza with the kids. You want to impress on people that the title pastor is meaningful for you, and that you are doing the hard work and preparing your sermons. So anyways, any other thoughts from anybody? Delmar?
Yeah, Frank, actually that kind of starts something, because I think you make a good point. You need, when you're in the pulpit, you're a youth pastor, but you're at that moment, you're the preacher. You know, you're the communicator. Can I extend that outside the pulpit? If you work with students, or if you don't work with students, carry yourself that way outside the pulpit as well. Be respected outside of the pulpit, not the guy who just wears shorts and t-shirts every single day to church because you can. Like, have if that's something you aspire to, then what you need to do is you need to go ahead and make that move in your life now, even though you're called to a specific other thing. Y'all are laughing because I'm assuming that Florida, that's what you do. Shorts and
Bro,
t-shirts.
it's my attire every day of my life. It's
But
shorts,
dude,
t-shirts, and
You ain't
Crocs.
wearing it in the
Buy a
pulpit,
tie,
Tim. I
people.
came and I
Buy a
saw
tie.
you had a nice shirt.
I dress nice in the pulpit. Dell was calling me out for what I wear outside the pulpit, and I'm offended.
Actually, I was
I've
actually
never worn gym shorts.
If you have a pump like Tim's got going right
That's
now,
what I was about
you
to
got to
say.
wear a t-shirt.
Tim's always, he's
Tight
strapped
one,
with
a
so many
medium.
muscles. You get a, okay, if this guy is super ripped, if he's like John Cena, okay, then he gets a pass, okay? But
That's
if you
quite
were
the
like
comparison to me.
It's the
like
only pass.
4/5 of this podcast, then you need to put, shave up, all right, and get cleaned up.
Wow.
I am the 1%.
No,
Why is he throwing
actually,
sprays
Jeff,
at
you're
me?
looking pretty good, man. You look like you've lost some weight. So
I
totally,
have.
totally derailing it. But the point I'm trying to make is, if you want them to respect you, to put you on that pulpit, you need to be respected off of it as well. Even with your pastors, one of you guys made a good point. Maybe, why are you only preaching once every so often? That may be the culture of your church. It may be because you need to earn the respect of your pastor a little bit more. So I'll just offer that. Yeah.
This goes with what Frank said about being narcissistic a little bit. This is going to sound narcissistic too, but forgive me. Are you preaching every 6 to 8 weeks because somebody was like, man, this guy's a great communicator, we got to get him in the rotation? Or is it, this guy will not stop asking for time behind the pulpit, and I'm going to appease him and just give him some time every like 6 weeks? Don't be that second guy. I almost would say, like, you got to feel your church culture, but it's almost, I mean, Jesus said it's better to be asked than to ask, right? Like, it's better to sit at the end of the table and be asked to scoot up than the other way. I never asked to preach at my church. I never thought of myself as the preacher. One of the elders, his kids, was in my youth group and heard me teaching and went to the pastor without my knowledge and was like, we got to figure out a way to fit him in the rotation. He's a little rough around the edges, but I think it would be great. And so if that's what's happening and you're getting asked to speak every 6 to 8 weeks because you're a good communicator, then just keep doing what you're doing and keep getting better and honing your skills. It's going to get more often. You're going to get opportunities. But if you're like bugging your pastor to preach and he's like, my gosh, this guy again, I guess I can throw him in the rotation, you don't want to be that guy. So, figure out which one of those two you are. And if you're the second one, quit.
Yeah, Jeff, I think there, like, when people were asking about the conferences and the camps, I would always say, if you're a good communicator, people will find out. Like, there's a lot of average communicators and people who are rough around the edges. And what's sadly is, Jeff, the people you just described, people who are like the random congregants who are just like, can I preach on a Sunday or whatever? Like those folks are oftentimes not good communicators. And so So
Frank,
if
tell
you,
us about the way that you developed preachers at a bigger church, because I loved the way you did the sermon feedback and the whole
yeah,
system
yeah,
you had.
yeah,
That'd
yeah,
be a great thing, even for smaller churches.
yeah. I mean, yeah. Basically, every Thursday there was a meeting. It was like 3 hours where we would get together. We would hear the sermon for that Sunday, and then we would hear the sermons for the following 2 weeks after that. And it was heavily critiqued. But everyone in the communicators of the church were in the room, but there was also non-communicators in the room. But also, if there were people who were like being developed to eventually communicate. It's kind of like how people do like Bible studies for elders and training and stuff. It's like those people get in the room, and those folks who maybe want to communicate, when you hear that like feedback conversation, that might say, I don't want to be a part of this because that's too intimidating for them, whatever. But that like critique process where like I'm going to preach a sermon, and then you four guys are going to just rip it apart and tell me my jokes weren't as funny as I thought they were. I may have said a little bit of heresy. My points are all a mess. I didn't land the plane well. Like I always now, 10 years later, I like live off of that feedback, and like I'm scared to write sermons without that kind of feedback. But like for a young communicator whose ego is a little more fragile, that's an environment they don't necessarily want to be in. So I would say, especially if this guy's in a church where there's two other communicators, I would wonder if there is some sort of kind of like uh, group teaching, like prep thing. Like we were just talking to a guy a few minutes ago who's at a church that has like 6 or 7 campuses, and all the communicating pastors get together and they talk about the sermons upcoming week and they share their points and stuff like that. Like that only makes you a better communicator, but also the feedback and the critiques are so important. So yeah, I mean, Jeff, you might be right. Like I hope this guy isn't the person that is asking to communicate, because then I'll be surprised if the senior pastor would let that person, because I know every senior pastor I've ever met has had people in their church to say, I would love to preach on a Sunday, and they've come up with creative ways to curve that person. If this person is that person, then he must have some really persuasive speech, because I don't know many senior pastors who just let other people randomly get in the pulpit because they asked.
We're all kind of speculating. We don't know who this person is. We don't know what their context is. But I would pay attention to context. I think if you are at a church that has 3 people preaching on a regular basis, that's a fairly unique thing. And because of that, you might think that your context is going to translate over to another context. I think we've all known people, most of us have some roots back in student ministry, and we've all had the youth pastor buddy who had, I've got a youth group of 200 kids. Of course, I can go to that little Baptist church and just kill it in front of 70 people. And then they bomb and they don't get that job when they thought, in their minds, that church, they'd already turned it into a church of 400 because, I can lead this youth group of this many people. So, of course, I can revitalize and do that. Contexts are different and context matters. And if you are mastering your one context, there's nothing wrong with being the master of one context. But you need to realize that because what you do works in one church, it isn't necessarily going to work in another church or in another context as well. So my best advice is be open to wherever the Spirit leads. If God has given you a desire to be out there preaching and out there teaching, that's probably a good thing. But God has also placed you under a pastor, under deacons or elders at the church where you're at. Listen to them, because they're going to know you better than you know yourself when it comes to this skill set.
Good word. Andrew, we're going to go to the next question. And this next question, I primarily want Andrew to give us his wisdom on this one. The other guys, I would love to hear your feedback if you feel like if you have thoughts on this. But this question came in our Facebook group about 2 days ago, and it really like broke my heart. Like, this is the kind of stuff that like makes me want to like, obviously whoever this person is, like you're invited to the Practical Pastor Conference for free. We want to like care for you and like love you, bro. But like this is the kind of stuff that's like why I think Practical Pastoring exists, is because if you don't have a safe community to process this stuff, clearly you're in a context where like you can't necessarily talk about this with your elders and stuff like that. So here's a question from our Facebook group. Dear fellow pastors, I wanted to share something that's been heavy on my heart and seek your wisdom. I'm a pastor of 2 kids. and my 9-year-old son has high-functioning autism, ADHD, and bipolar disorder. Some days are great, but others are incredibly challenging, especially when those difficult moments happen on Sundays and when we're hosting people at our home. Recently, after a particular tough Sunday, an elder approached me and referenced 1 Timothy 3. While I understand the importance of leadership and love in my role, his comments felt hurtful. I stayed calm, listened, and thanked him for sharing his thoughts, but I also tried to explain our situation again. Even so, I walked away feeling deeply discouraged. For those of you who may have children with similar challenges, how do you navigate these situations? How do you balance your pastoral responsibilities with the realities of parenting a child with special needs, especially when others in the church may not fully understand? Thank you in advance for your advice and prayers. Andrew.
This is a lane that we have been in, and I commented in the group, and so I don't want to regurgitate all of that stuff, but I have 4 sons, and we say we're a little bit neurospicy in the gene pool. One of my sons struggles a bit more than the others, and in some ways we say it's like living with Sheldon Cooper. It's not an intellectual issue with him, primarily a social issue, but also impulse control with the ADHD and things as well. So we're very similar in diagnoses here, and it's hard because there's something unique about invisible disabilities that people treat differently. If you are at the mall and you see a kid who obviously has Down syndrome throwing a fit, you're going to think, oh, those poor parents, what can we do to help them? What can we do to serve them? But if there's a kid with autism who's having a similar type of break, your initial reaction is, what is wrong with that kid? What's wrong with his parents? Why aren't they stepping up and doing something? And so I read this and was just angry and hurt, and it brought back all kinds of negative memories from experiences that I've had. By the grace of God and a whole lot of occupational therapy and things, we're doing good and are doing well. Guess is that this elder is someone who is probably on the older side of elder. This is not a 37 or 38-year-old elder, because the younger people with younger families have experienced this more. When we were in elementary and middle school, there wasn't really classroom integration. My son, who's 8, has had a boy in his class every year since preschool who is on the high functioning autism spectrum. And so he just gets it at this point. He's like, oh, okay. And kids kind of learn how to deal and how to cope and how to assist their classmates. And I think that's such a gift that we are integrating people into traditional classrooms that we didn't get, or at least I didn't get when I was growing up. So I would say that the best advice is maybe have a little bit of grace for this elder, because he is clearly coming from a place of ignorance. This is not someone who knows what he's talking about. And if you want to share this clip with that elder, give him my phone number. I would love to have a conversation with him and tell him that he doesn't know what he's talking about. Also, when it comes to balancing your responsibilities, you can't. Your church, throughout its history, let's say your church survives another 100 years. There will probably be 7 or 8, if you're lucky, pastors at that church. Your son gets one dad. If you have to choose, you've made a bad choice. And sometimes maybe that's not on you. Maybe that's on your spouse. My wife was not as actively involved in lots of the ministry things that she would have liked to have been involved in when we were really going through the thick of things of trying to get medications right and trying to get diagnoses and trying to get services within the school system. And so it was a conversation that we had as a family. Hey, mom needs to take a step back, and maybe that's something that needs to happen. But you also need to let people in to what's going on. People are not going to naturally know or understand. And so it's going to be your job to let them know what your struggles are, let them know what the wins are, let them know what the things you're grieving. So get a group of people who know you and love you and hopefully are in your church, and then let them in, and then let them be the ones that are saying, whoa, 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 when someone says something completely off the chain that makes no sense. You shouldn't have to be the one to stand up and defend your parenting. If you have people in your church that know you and love you and understand what's going on with your kid, that will go to bat for you. That's one of the things that we've been very, very fortunate to have here, is people who know my kids and love my kids and understand when there's a good day or a bad day, what's going on. and find a group, find some pastors that you can commiserate with. That is exactly what practically pastoring is for, to find a tribe that gets you, that understands what you're dealing with. So yeah, to echo Frank, come hang out with us, be a part of the Practically Pastoring Conference. And I get it. It's hard. It's horrible. And if that elder is not willing to change how he's seeing things, and I'm guessing that was not a statement from the board of elders, and I don't know what your church is, I don't know what the governance is, but I am guessing there would be other elders and certainly other elder spouses who would be horrified at that statement. So don't assume the opinion of one person on everybody else, but also be willing to take a step back and say, what is my calling? What is my primary calling? And can I work with this? Because you don't get to choose between being a dad or a pastor. You are a dad who happens to be a pastor.
So, Andrew, what would your advice be to maybe some elders who want to come alongside their pastor or, the lead pastor of the church, who know, and they know that, that the pastor has a child or a few kids that are, what's your word, neurospicy?
Neurospicy.
So what are some ways that as elders we could better serve this pastor?
Get to know the kids. Find out what that kid is into. If there are adults that will talk to my kids, whether it be about Legos or whatever movie, that find a way to connect with those kids. And there are a few key adults that my kids will always be comfortable going to, because those adults build bridges to that kid. So instead of looking from afar and saying, oh, find a way to connect to the kid, but also check in with pastor's wife, pastor's spouse, and say, hey, how are you doing? How is the church serving you? Don't expect everything out of the pastor's family. Like, yes, you expect the pastor to preach the 45, 48 times on Sunday mornings, but you don't expect perfection out of the pastor's family. I think one of the reasons that we are seeing less and less people of our life stage pastoring in the United States is that right there. There is, especially in the social media heightened world, there is an expectation of perfection that people just don't want. Hey, I'm going to stay a youth pastor until I'm 53, until the kids are out of the house, because I don't want that extra spotlight on my family. And it hurts the church. The reason that the American church is in crisis is because we have 35-year-olds that don't want to step into that senior ministry role because they don't want to deal with crap like this, nor should they have to.
Agreed. And I think, like you guys say a lot, there's a discipleship issue, because this guy needs an understanding of what that text is really about. That text does have a framework that it does apply to elders, but when you have a kid with a disability, that is a totally different conversation.
Okay, I just want to talk about this, him referencing 1 Timothy 3, because this elder, I'm assuming coming frustrated, is maybe showing himself to be disqualified as an elder based on this conversation. And I want to say to this brother, like, first of all, you're not wrong or crazy or whatever word you want to use for feeling hurt by this. This is hurtful. It is absolutely expected that you would feel hurtful and defensive of your family. I don't have this experience with my kids in particular being neurospicy, but my family's angle on this kind of conversation is foster care, because those kids come from very difficult situations sometimes, and you have to deal with, sometimes people have assumptions about their bio family that are pretty judgmental. Yes, there typically is some substance abuse issues going on and things like that, but those are people too who have gotten themselves in a really bad situation. And so I find in myself a difficulty being patient with people who ask me sometimes silly questions. So what I would want to push back on, well, two things, two sides of the same coin. If I was part of this church and I was another elder in this church and I heard about this going on, I'd want to approach this elder and say, brother, you yourself have qualifications that you may be walking outside of right now. Being sober-minded is one of the qualifications of being an elder. Being self-controlled, which apparently you're not demonstrating in this kind of conversation, is a qualification for being an elder. So there may need to be that conversation as well. But as the pastor of the church, I think it's important to remember that there are times when you can have men who hold the title elder who maybe show themselves to be disqualified from being an elder that you just kind of have to live with. That's just the reality of life in churches. Sometimes we kind of forget about that. And I mean that as an encouragement. Like, brother, you may be thinking, why is this guy an elder? And you might be right. and you might be unable to pull the trigger on, I need to get rid of this elder. But just you knowing that that is the case, I think could be hopefully encouraging to go, it's not me. Like, I'm not wrong for feeling defensive over my child with a disability. He needs extra care, and I want to provide that for him. I'm his dad. But on the other side of that coin, let's say that this guy is a good elder, and you know him to be a good elder, and you know he loves your family, and he just had a bad day. I would encourage you, if that's the case and you have a good relationship with him, to share these vulnerable thoughts with him that this was pretty hurtful when you said this. Maybe take 48 hours, take a week, whatever you need to do, and share with him and trust that, hey, this guy is qualified to be an elder. I've seen the fruit of it in his life before. He is self-controlled, respectable, hospitable. He is gentle and not quarrelsome. So when I give him this feedback, I can trust that the Holy Spirit's working in his life. And maybe this will be a place where the reconciliation of our relationship will lead to something really beautiful in the life of the church. Could even end up being an opportunity for you to share that with a few people of how you were able to reconcile this relationship. I don't know, but I would hope that that could be one of the possible outcomes in a situation like this. Again, I think what Frank said is perfect. Defer to Andrew in this conversation, because I don't know that any of the rest of us have this challenge in our life. We have other challenges, but not this one. And man, I had the same emotional response. Like my first response was anger when I read this, real frustration at this elder and wanting to kind of lash out and say, oh, really? We're going to talk about 1 Timothy 3? Let's talk about it then. But that's probably not the best first move.
Well, whoever wrote this post, I want to encourage you to reach out to one of us on the Practically Pastoring podcast. We would love to offer you a free ticket. If you can get here to Florida, maybe make this elder pay for your travel. I'm just kidding. That's too far. But if you can get here, we would love to give you a free ticket and just encourage you for a week, man. With that being said, we hope you enjoyed this episode. We'll be back next week. And come to the Practically Pastoring Conference, practicallypastoringconference.com. With that being said, I'm Frank Gill.
I'm Jeff Simpson.
I'm Delmar Pete.
I'm Andrew Larson.
And I'm Timothy Miller.
Turkey 20.
This is Practically Pastoring. See ya.